Hello, this is the Harvard Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. Two ways to do this is through email and YouTube. All right, so I'm pretty much on a lot of different podcast platforms, so it won't be hard to find me. And I appreciate all you listeners. Thank you so much. Okay, so on to the topic of choice here. So I find it quite interesting with the aspects of how certain things in nature are viewed throughout time. So this episode is going to focus on that specifically with how the sun was viewed to cultures throughout history, and the aspects of how, when we get into spiritual aspects and all of that. So let's dive into it. Alright, so I relayed this briefly, because on Sundays what I do, I extend out and I give a lot of candid thought about topics and everything, and for members, supporters. So feel free to be a supporter or a member. All you gotta do is click the link in the description for this episode of my podcast. All right, so on to it. So, yeah, the sun. Now it's part of our daily routine. It's part of, whether we're hermit crabs or what have you, or we're part of that concrete jungle. We need the sun in order to be a proprietor of how we go about our daily lives. So it's quite interesting when the aspects of what is more valuable in culture changes the perception of the sun. So what do I mean by this? Now, really good, I think, a case study, everything, so forth, to really learn by, yes, baby, and the emphasis of case study is the Industrial Revolution. Now, when the Mama, don't you even.
I'm not going to turn over the fan.
Okay. Now, when you think about the Industrial Revolution, for the most part, it varies to different people, but, it's this whole idea of how it was a significant change in the way in which people move themselves and culturally and progressive first world nations. So, what am I saying? So typically, before the Industrial Revolution, people were going on the aspects of agricultural, farming, and sustaining themselves that way, right? And then, pretty much everything that was done through the way in which, there's variations to it. When we get into Rome and Greece and everything, but there's still, it's very predominant the way in which weather and specifically the sun is centered in the culture. So when the Industrial Revolution came about, this was the time in which, it's more prevalent to work indoors. It's more prevalent to have long, extensive work hours. And then also getting into the format. If you do it again, you will not be allowed. Okay? I'm serious. Stop. Sorry about that. To where, you know, your your work routine and your daily life is very structured to where, you know, we get into this weird mix of this work-life balance and making sure that's implemented in everything. To where it was a time where, you know, it wasn't an issue where separating the two. Okay, so with this bill said, I am going to get into facts about the aspects of all of this with how the sun was viewed. All right, so as I mentioned all the time, now all the sources will be provided for you in this episode. So first, I'm gonna talk about worship, and because it's quite interesting in the aspects of, you know, specifically when we get into how religion plays a factor in sun worship. So, you know, here we go. Let's see what they have to say about it. So this was originally written in 2018, and this was by Patty Wigington. So the source is learnreligious.com. All right, so Lita, the summer solstice, the sun is at its highest point in the sky. So many ancient cultures mark this date as a significant hey, stop. Go back there, okay? Hey, what did I say? What did I say? Go back in the grass. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? Thank you. I know, fine. Quit talking back. Yes, ma'am. All right. Sorry. Anyway. So many ancient cultures mark this date as significant. And the concept of sun worship is one nearly as old as mankind itself. So in societies that were primarily agricultural, as I mentioned earlier, and dependent on the sun for life and substance, it is no surprise that the sun became a definition of this. While many people today might take the day to go out or go to the beach or work on their tans, for our ancestors, the summer solstice was a time of great spiritual importance. You know, especially to add on to this when we get in the aspects of Egyptian culture. So, the god Ra, am I mistaken? You know, it was very significant to how the status and the symbol of the sun, you know, impact the way in which the Egyptians believed and gave sacrifices and gave thoughts about the aspects of how important the sun is to their culture. And, you know, when we get into the, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer because, hey, the sun is the proprietor of life. You know, you can't have plant growth. You can't have, you know, the aspects of how the animals sustain themselves and live. You can't have pollination without sun. It's, you know, everything tied into the aspects of how fertile your agriculture is, if the significance of the sun, how prevalent the sun is in the elements of the culture, and then that has a lot of, you know, this is a very interesting subject without me going on a tangent. You know, case in point, some people say, you know, with climate change here, that, oh, you know, we gotta raise the importance of how our carbon footprint, or, you know, things of that nature. But I see it as this, you know, you can do the best that you can, but things like it's still gonna go on. So you know, and then a lot of things has to do with, yes, you know, it's unfortunate with the aspects of progression of time. You know, when we get in the aspects of factories and steel mills and all this kind of things, and how that changes the how pollution changes the climate. But I don't know. That's something that's even though it's pushed that way in the mainstreams, you know, starting with Al Gore with the unconvenient truth. There's a lot of to fix things like this. It's not black and white. There's a lot of powers that be in us. A lot of wheels to put in the spoke to make that work right. So anyway, let's go on to more aspects about this. So it says William Taylor Alcott wrote The Sun Lord of All Ages, which was published in 1914. That worships of the sun was considered idolatrous and thus something to be forbidden once Christianity gained a religious foothold, he says. Specifically when we get in the aspects of talking about, from a biblical standpoint and the Old Testament, when we get into accounts of Moses and the accounts of Noah and so forth and all these things, there's a lot of significant examples of the aspects of teaching moral lessons about how things go astray when the culture was more focused on idolatrizing or being idols, using idols as a means of spiritual support, whereas monotheism, spreading the understanding of monotheism and Christianity and all this, and then distincting between Hebrewism, the Jewish faith versus Christianity, how that sected itself out. That's quite interesting. All right, so nothing proves so much. Let's read what he says. So it says, he's quoted by saying this. Now, nothing proves so much the antiquity. I'm not telling you again. Okay, go inside.
No.
You don't listen, you can't be out here. Do you hear me?
I wouldn't say.
Go in the grass.
Yes, you do.
Thank you. All right, I'm sorry, y'all. All right, so let's get back into it. All right, so let's rephrase that again. It says, nothing proves so much the antiquity of solar idolatry as the core Moses took it to profit. So take care, said some Moses. I'm sorry, guys. Let me rephrase that again. Moses took it to profit. Take care, and he said to the Israelites, when you lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun, the moon, and all the stars, you will be seduced and drawn away to pay worship and adoration to the creatures which the Lord your God has made for the service of all the nations under heaven. Then when we have the mention of Josiah taking away the horses that the king of Judah had given to the sun and burning the chariot of the sun with the fire. So these references agree perfectly with the recognition of the Palmyra of the Lord Sun. So Baal and Shema, and the identification of the Assyrian Bel and the Tyrian Baal with the sun. How that translates. And it's quite interesting with the aspects of how these things, when we get into the Bible, and the parables and what Jesus is saying, and then we get back into the Old Testament when there's a lot of references of the stories, which they take notice to of gods and goddesses and how the stories are similar. And I think it's just another account of the aspects of, okay, we're going to write stories, we're going to write the Bible in a way in which people relate to. And then, it's another case in point to, see this as a guiding stone and not to take everything so literal. And then it's just when people get so wrapped up into the emotions of, because they don't want to take the time to understand something, it can wipe away from the rich gem that is presented in the scriptures of Christianity. So with that said, I'm going to get more into the aspects of how the sun was viewed in Egypt and Greece. So the Egyptian people honored Ra, the sun god, for people in ancient Egypt. So the sun was a source of life. It was powerful, and the energy and the light and the warmth that is associated with it. It was It was what made the crops grow each season, so it was no surprise that the cult of Ra had immense power and was widespread. Now Ra was the ruler of the heavens. He was the god of the sun, and the bringer of the light, and the patron of the pharaohs. So according to legend, the sun travels the skies, and as Ra drives the chariot through the heavens, as Ra, if he drives the chariot through the heavens. Now, although he originally was a... What did I tell you?
Mommy found the coffee, not in the glass.
Okay, I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm back here. Alright, so according to legend, the sun travels the skies. Ra, what I was saying about drives his chariot through the heavens, although he originally was associated only with the midday sun. As time went by, Ra became connected to the sun's presence all day long. Now the Greeks honor Helios, who was similar to Ra in many aspects. So Homer described Helios as giving light both to gods and men. So the cult of Helios celebrated each year with an impressive ritual that involved a giant chariot pulled by horses off the end of the cliff into the sea. Jeez. Wow. That's something. So, Native American traditions. In many Native American cultures, such as the Iroquois and Plains people, the sun was recognized as a life-giving force. So many of the Plain tribes still perform a sun dance each year, which is seen as a renewal of the bond of man has with life, earth, in the growing season. So the Mesoamerican cultures, in the Mesoamerican cultures, the sun was associated with the kingship, and many rulers claimed divine rights by way of their direct descendants from the sun. All right, so let's see what's going on in Persia, so the Middle East, and also in Asia. As part of the cult of Miratha, early Persian societies celebrate the rising of the sun each day. So the legend of Maratha may well have given birth to the Christian resurrection story. So honoring the sun was an integral part of the ritual and the ceremony of Mithraism. So at least as far as scholars have been able to determine. So one of the highest ranks one could achieve in Marathic temples was that of the Heliodramus, or sun carrier. So sun worship has also been found in Babylonian texts and in a number of Asian religion cults. So as of today, many pagans honor the sun at midsummer, and it continues to shine its fiery energy upon, so bringing light and warmth to the earth. So how's the sun as far as honoring it going on today? How's it viewed today? So let's see what they say. So how can you celebrate the sun as part of your life spiritually? It's not hard to do. After all, the sun is out there almost all the time. So try a few of these ideas and incorporate the sun into your ritual and celebration. They say, yellow, orange candles and so forth. And then consider starting each day by offering a prayer to the rising sun and your day with one another as it sets. Alright, so that's one thought about the aspects and the cultural value of the sun. Let's go on to more. Alright, so let's go back here with this. Alright, so this is by Science and Industry, the Science and Industry Museum. So, throughout history, humans have been inspired by the sun, believing it to have divine powers, the ability to heal sickness, and potentially provide a clean, lasting source of power. So, let's see what the Norse horse is associated with when it comes to the sun. So, in the Bronze Age, Norse civilizations believed that the sun was drawn through the sky on a chariot pulled by a divine horse. A belief that can be illustrated by the sun chariot discovered in the Turnholm Moss Bog in northwestern New Zealand. And this dates back to around 1400 BCE. So one side of the disc is gilded to represent... Hush, baby. Don't be so loud, please. I know, but be quiet. To represent the sun during the daytime, while the others is left dark to represent what presented to the earth as the sun returns to the west and east during the nighttime. So the sun chariot wasn't the only vehicle believed to have helped the sun on its journey across the sky. So across Scandinavia, drawings can be found of the sun being carried by a ship or helped by fish and snakes. Alright, so Copernicus and the movement of the planets. So, when we think about Copernicus, we get in the aspects of the importance of science and exploration. So, one of the most famous beliefs about the sun and the planets was that orbited the earth, and which was placed at the center of the universe. So, this belief went back to ancient Greek times when scientists included Ptolemy proposed that the earth was the stable center of the universe around in which everything else revolved. So the principle was accepted for centuries and was adopted by the Catholic Church as being consistent with that which is written in the Bible. Alright, so Polish scientist Nicholas Copernicus was the first to suggest a feasible alternative theory, that the earth was not at the center of the universe, but that the sun was, possibly closer to it, and that the planets orbited the sun, not the earth. So Copernicus finished his book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. So in 1532, it was published until 1543, just 2 months before Copernicus died. So a savvy printer added a note suggesting that the book theory wasn't really true, which prevented the church from immediately denouncing it as heretic. Although on the revolution of the heavenly spheres, it was eventually banned by the Catholic Church in 1660, and it was also denounced by the religious leader Martin Luther. In sickness and in health, Apollo was the Greek god of the sun, and also the god of the healing, and for this reason, the apocryphy shops were often marked by signs showing Apollo in the form of the sun. Now, actually, this wasn't an incorrect belief. So, for instance, in the 1880s, scientists discovered that UV light can kill the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. Now, this led to treatments including helotherapy, where patients suffering from TB were wheeled outside in specially designed cages. So if the sun wasn't shining, a fisherman lamp would create artificial sunlight for patients. Not all beliefs about the healing power of the sun were right. However, John Harvey Kellogg, when, if I'm not mistaken, when you think about cereal, the Kellogg with cereal, invented the electronic light bath for the use of sanitarium. So Kellogg believed that heat from incandescent light bulbs drew blood away from sick organs, so a theory which was never proven. Alright, so let's go on to more aspects. Alright, so I'm going to end on this. So, everlasting power from the sun. A more recent belief is that recreating the nuclear fission reactions that take place within the sun could generate limitless energy for humankind. So, nuclear fission is a process that happens deep in the sun, where atoms are fused together, creating enormous amounts of energy, which is then released as light. Now, these in 1958 news articles talked about scientists successfully creating nuclear fusion. However, it later turned out that it wasn't such a success after all. So despite this, scientists still believe that nuclear fusion can be achieved and can help us move towards a carbon-free future. Some science for thought there. All right, so I'm going to end on this here. All right, as soon as it pulls up, I'll get it for you. All right. So the role of the sun in ancient cultures and myths. All right, so rituals and festivals honoring the sun. Let's focus on Stonehenge. To honor the sun's significance, ancient cultures developed elaborate rituals and festivals that celebrate its role in their lives. So the construction of monuments and temples aligned with the sun's movement and is a testament to its profound influence. One of the most famous examples is Stonehenge in England. It was believed to have been used for solar ceremonies during the solstice. So the alignment of its stones with the rising and setting of the sun highlights the meticulous observation of the celestial aspects of everything. So in Mesopotamian cultures, such as the Aztecs and the Mayans, when we get into Mesoamerican, Mexican, or Mexican American cultures, let's get into that. So the Mesoamerican cultures, such as the Aztecs and the Mayans, the sun was a central focus to their religious practices. So the Aztecs worshiped I'll do my best to pronounce this. I'm pretty good with, I guess you can say intermediate, but I'll do my best. So, I don't know, because this isn't my native tongue, so, I'll try the best I can. So, the Hitolopo Chili, or I'm trying my best, which is the sun god, and perform elaborate rituals included human sacrifice to ensure the sun's daily rise. So they believe that these offerings provided the energy needed for the sun to continue its journey. So thus maintaining the balance of the universe. So the Mayans, on the other hand, constructed temples like those of the Chichen Itza designed for this. So solar festivals were also a key part of the cultural life. So the ancient Indian festivals of the Makara Sankranti celebrates the sun's transition and the zodiac sign of the Capricorn, marking the end of the winter and the beginning of the long days. So these festivals were not only spiritual occasions but also practical markers of agricultural cycles guiding planting and harvesting activities. All right, so the sun is a source of inspiration and meaning. So the sun's daily rise and its set inspired countless myths and stories, reflecting humanity's attempts to understand its mysteries. Many myths frame the sun as a hero undertaking a particular journey across the sky. In Japanese mythology, the sun goddess Amaterasu is one of the most revered deities, symbolizing life, warmth, and life with that. So her temporary retreat into the cave in a famous myth causes darkness to envelop to the world, which emphasizes the huge importance of the sun in sustaining life. Now let's go on to Norse mythology. So the Norse mythology, the sun was personified as Sol, a goddess who drove a chariot across by horse in the sky. So she was pursued by a wolf, symbolizing the constant tension between light and darkness. Now this myth reflected the particulars balance of nature in the world and humanity's resilience on the sun's presence. Alright, so these stories reveal the sun's universal role as a source of meaning and connection. So across cultures, It was seen as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual worlds, linking humanity to the cosmos. Its reliable cycle of life and darkness provide a sense of order and continuity, shaping not only practical aspects of life but also philosophical and existential reflections. Alright, so in conclusion, the sun's role in ancient cultures and myths extends far beyond its physical presence in the sky. As a symbol of power, a focus of rituals, and a source of inspiration, it held a central place in the human imagination. So, enduring fascination with the sun highlights its timeless impact on how we understand our place in the world. How nice to end on. So, I'd like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. The best way to do that is 2 ways, as I mentioned earlier in the show. Email and YouTube. I appreciate you all. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye for now.